outdoor workers, and then it affects their health, their income. From the women group, they suffer the heat exhaustion in the open air market. They have reduced trading hours and even lose their goods because of the heat, high temperatures. There is reduced work capacity and earnings during this week and during the peak heat time. So you realize that even our labor is affected during this time. Let's look at flash floods with respect to the urban centers. When floods happen, what happens? We have all been witnesses to these ones. And so women traders are affected. Look at our market, their income is affected, their debt goes high, their cared load gets expanded because when their goods get destroyed, how do they pay for the capital that they borrowed? So they even lose the working capital, and then they have more increased or widened unpaid recovery at home. Because mind you, even when there's flooding, our homes, the recovery time for the homes is women who bear the chance of how this is recovered. Let's look at people with disabilities at this point. You all notice that when even there are floods in our urban centers, it is the men, because of their physical ability, who help these women and the people living with different abilities to be able to go through even water, carry children along the side. So you see, there are even evacuation barriers, and their assistive devices can even be damaged. And then sometimes, and most of the times, you have delayed access to relief. The last part I would like to look at is coastal erosion effect on our fishery sector. And when you see the women fish processors, it affects their income, their health, their safety. Depleting fish stocks, unsafe processing areas, you have higher risk at sea, and losing and the fish stocks are depleted. So when we look at the typical effects of these hazards on the sectors that are very sensitive to climate change, you realize that, yes, everybody carries a burden, but in this case, some people carries more burden than the other. Let's look at this multi-hazard on education, how it even affects when there are long dry spells. And then so that I can wrap up on this one. So how is this affecting the girl child, the women in schools, even after school, mid schools, due to water collection? Because when there is no water, it is these women who go the long distances to collect water. The disruptions affect everybody, the heat in schools, and even our time when it comes to wash. At the end of every month, when we have to go through our natural processes and there's water shortages, who does it affect in schools? It's mostly the girl child and the women, and even from the unsafe water sources they have. And so with this said, the number of targeted actions that go against burdens the women more, we all would attest to the fact that, yes, there's a burden to share, but at every point in time, somebody carries more burden. What is our national response when it comes to being responsive on this burden we have placed on some vulnerable groups? And so I like first to touch on the National Adaptation Plan. That has always been our guiding principle. So the National Adaptation Plan is almost at its final stage, and it made provisions for gender strategies that covers from even the governance to even meetings. So policy and institutional alignment when it comes to being gender sensitive with the plan itself starts right from the governance structure of who is involved. And it will interest you to know that even at the cross-sectorial policy group, the gender perspective is a cross-cutting issue amongst all of the different groups. It also makes provision for gender mainstreaming at the sectorial and at the subnational levels. So there are interventions even from the courage of the risk assessment right down to even engagement and participatory approaches take care of gender inclusiveness here. I will talk a bit more further when I get to the sectorial strategies that I've also drawn from the already national response frameworks that we have. I move on to talk about the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. We cannot speak about an adaptation option without also mentioning that. And you see, it has a very unique approach to gender inclusiveness, where it's looking at gender inclusion as a cross-cutting issue amongst all the sectorial interventions. The other interesting part is that it's looking at the gender as a thematic area, where it's looking at how we can even acquire investments with concrete measures to ensure that we are building sex disaggregated data that is going to inform our initiatives and our priority options, and then would enhance capacity and empower the vulnerable groups, and then building social protection mechanisms. It is even looking at how we can have gender responsive early warning systems, which the sectors are even working on. There are many examples with even GMET, where they have even launched the gender responsive early warning systems, and then capacity building and awareness creation. I go on to the third one, which is the gender policy that has been updated. And will interest you to know that it has incorporated climate change gender relations in the gender policy. The third one, way back in 2013, with the National Climate Change Policy, very, very interesting at that point, it recognizes the institutional provision for gender mainstreaming, both at the national and at the subnational levels, where even gender desk and focal offices were supposed to be opened in these ministries to take care of the gender gaps with respect to initiatives, as well as making sure and highlighting that with all priority actions that has to be undertaken, it must be gender sensitive. Now let's look at the sector strategies that all draws from the national response frameworks we have for their interventions. So way back onto the NAP. So the NAP have focus areas for the national level, which is taking care of agriculture, water, health, gender, energy, disaster risk reduction, ecosystems, and biodiversity. We are looking at infrastructure as well. And I can say that right down from how this work started, with even the consultants who have been working, right down to participatory meetings, have all been gender inclusive. It is worth noting that even before the NAPS itself started place, there was a gender strategy that was developed to be able to ensure that all of the processes in developing the plan were gender sensitive. And so the project had an gender specialist on board. And I can say for a fact that it has been very inclusive, because the addition also here is where this part of the youth strategy was originally not part of the process. Sustainable Youth for Network Development, SYND, came to us, and I can say that for inclusiveness, they have been able to help to develop a youth strategy that has become part of the National Adaptation Plan. And so that is how responsive our national frameworks are to the burden that is placed when the impact of climate change hits. And yes, and so with this said, I think that now that the plan is yet to be outdoored in a short time, it will move from the plan to the implementation. And that is all where the long talk will need to be converted into implementation. And so that being said, with all what has been undertaken, we are just saying that it's not about the top of whether adaptation should happen, how resilient we should be. And adaptation is not just about responding to just the climate and hazards that occurred, but it's how we can use this national response frameworks to reshape the systems that determine who will thrive and eventually who suffers when the rain fails to come or when the floods rise beyond our capacity to adapt. And so true resilience would only emerge when adaptation recognizes that these differentiated burdens that we ourselves have acknowledged and have made provisions for are deliberate to empower the same vulnerable groups that we have identified as the best to be part and be equal actors in reshaping the solutions that we intend to do. So gender adaptation, then gender responsive adaptation is just not something we are adding on. It's not an add-on, but it's a foundation where we are looking to have a climate-ready Ghana. What do we mean when we say climate-ready Ghana? I just stick to three. There are more principles than just these three. But for the purposes of this discussion, it should be inclusive, it should be equitable, and it should be community-led, because adaptation is all a community-led program. And that is where we will get to the resilience that we crave for and are working towards, and are even making provisions with the national frameworks that have been made available. And so on this note, I have three key messages to share with you. And then these three key messages will be that climate change will only be effective if it is gender responsive. That is, when everybody who is vulnerable has been identified and put at the center of the solutions, where every step forward is taken together. Because once we have learned that the burdens is on some vulnerable groups, solutions definitely must not be seen. It must be identified. And I'm sure our frameworks will take it to the implementation level to ensure that those who are burdened the most, solutions are directed in that perspective. And the second one is looking at true resilience. It's only collective where every hand is held through the journey. And so it's a journey for all, not just a journey for some people, but then the true interventions are made sensitive to where vulnerable people have to be taken care of. And then adaptation, a national adaptation plan is telling you that adaptation is not just about leaving footprints in the policy, in our books, or in our frameworks, but it's about ensuring that the circle of the adaptation cycle, which is going to bring resilience, is unbroken. And so on this note, I say I thank you for your time, and I will be on standby. Thank you very much, and over to you, Regina.
Thank you very much, Madam Stella Oku, for that insightful presentation. A lot to chew on and a lot to deliberate on based on what you've presented to us. And at the appropriate time, would allow participants to ask their questions and bring their comments and reflections. But now let's go to our next speaker who has joined us on the meeting. I started introducing her, but because she wasn't here, I didn't finish. So let me just take the opportunity to do so now. She's Lois Ediamwa-Addo. She's a women's rights advocate and a project manager with the Women in Law and Development in Africa, WILDAF Ghana. She's the head of the WILDAF Ghana's Women's Economic Program area. She's been working with WILDAF Ghana for the past 15 years and has been instrumental in ensuring the successful implementation of over 10 projects and has led several campaigns both at the national and international levels. Now, these projects have been focused on women's land rights, sexual and gender-based violence, women's participation in decision-making, access to justice, among others. She holds a master's degree in international affairs, a degree in law, and a degree in integrated development studies. Madam Lois Ediamwa-Addo, welcome to the call. And it's a pleasure to have you. So we've heard from Madam Stella Oku. She's talked a lot about who is shouldering the burden the most. But from your perspective as a women's land rights advocate, what more can you add to the conversation?
Okay, thank you, Regina. And I want to thank my first presenter for bringing in the climate change dimensions and how it affects gender, and then the national policies and programs, particularly the NDCs that government have already commenced its effective implementation and how we could take advantage of it. So she made it a bit simple. I don't need to go back to, climate change and then who bears the burden, since she's been able to set the pace. So I would rather want to give more details on how it affects, the burden that it puts on women, particularly smallholder women farmers, with respect to access to their land rights and agricultural resources better in details. So we all know that most of our rural women find themselves within the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector contributes about 1/3 of our national GDP, and we data have been able to discuss that between 40 to 60% of the labor force within the agricultural sector are women. So many of the smallholder women farmers find themselves within the agricultural sector. And one of the major challenges affecting smallholder women farmers, and we all know that in Ghana, if you want to be really defined as a person within the agricultural sector, you need to be able to identify yourself with a piece of land. Okay, policy wise, who is a farmer is somebody who owns a piece of land. So many, but however, in reality, when we go to the communities, the issue is about their access and control to land. And then we all know how climate change has a direct relationship with land rights and then access to agricultural resources. And this is how it plays out. Most of the time, because many times we consider males more as the owners of land because of our sociocultural norms. Lands are mostly owned by men. When it gets to taking decisions on land, it is about men. Landowners are men. Okay, so when it gets to decisions on land, you hardly find women. So the women participation in decision making starts right from who owns the land and then who is in control. So when those who don't own are not in control, then they are the ones who are worst affected in terms of policy engagement. They are least engaged. Many smallholder women farmers are not engaged in terms of most of the policies that are undergoing. The NDCs, we could also find out how smallholder women farmers, the majority within the agricultural sector, one of the sectors that climate change heavily affects, whether they were really engaged. So these are some of the dynamics. So once women know they are not having control and access to land, they don't take steps. All these policies that we roll out, they hardly want to follow them because what is the security? What is the security that they have on their land? They hardly take steps and measures to secure the land, because when you know you only have a short tenure on the land, okay, you have a short tenure on the land, you have only 1 year. Why do you have to go in for agriculture? Most of the recommendations that are made by our our policymakers in ensuring that we're able to address climate change, they wonder what is in for them when you don't have secured rights to land. And this is also another challenge because they cannot invest into these systems and then they know they cannot stay on it for very long. So when we want to address issues on, the effective solutions in addressing climate change in terms of who bears the burden, the majority, those in the smaller sectors, then we need to be sure that we have been able to help them have secured rights to land. They are part of decision-making processes. And then we can also speak about sexual and gender-based violence, its major impact on these women. When you have very little control over financial resources and agricultural opportunities, you easily become vulnerable to sexual and gender-based violence. And that is one of the burdens that women face in sectors where they don't have that kind of equal bargaining power or equal access to opportunities. They fall prey to all these vices that happen in the community. So some of the other dimensions beyond the ones that have been enumerated, we can also look at the impact of sexual and gender-based violence, and then also their access to income. So these are other areas that women bear so much burden when we talk about the impact of climate change on women and then the most vulnerable. I'll also speak about property rights. Because of their illiterate nature, in the illiteracy nature that they find themselves in, most of the time do not ensure that the right legal procedures that are required in terms of access marital arrangements. Many of the women don't know their rights in their marriage, so they don't work towards securing them in terms of property rights. So these are also aspects that affect them heavily, that although we will put in systems when it gets to issues on their property right, their knowledge and their laws, although we have legal frameworks, we have the Land Act, apart from the NDCs, we have the Land Act, we have the Marriage Causes Act. I mean, many of them are not able to take steps in terms of some of the effect that these vices, I mean, the other aspects of when, I mean, issues like climate change really happen in the communities, how they will be able to take advantage of these legal frameworks to protect their property rights. In terms of financial inclusion, because they don't have their rights to land and property, it becomes very difficult for them to have the collateral. I mean, when you want to access financial opportunities, most of the time they want you to be able to show that you have some kind of collaterals. You are supposed to be in groups. I mean, the conditions that you'll be able to accept certain levels of financial opportunities within the financial institutions is a big challenge. So these other aspects of the impact of climate change related issues also affect women. They also bear these burdens, which sometimes are not well, do not come out so strongly in our analysis on who bears the burden. So I think that on this note, I want to share that if we really want to resolve some of these issues, we could be able to look at I mean, the sociocultural norms, I mean, and then how the communities best practices that many organizations have used, like WorldF, I mean, using the legal literacy volunteers approach, educating women on their human rights, the gender approaches, in helping them identify exactly the legal frameworks that protect them and how they could be able to use that to access some of these opportunities in terms of land rights, access to justice, and then access to agricultural opportunities and policies within the NDCs. We could also look at promoting the effective implementation of legal frameworks in Ghana. You know, we have a number of many laws in Ghana beyond the ones within the climate. I mean, the others. We have a number of legal frameworks, the Domestic Violence Act, the family laws, but as to how effectively are they implemented, particularly in areas worst hit by climate change. And then how do we mainstream gender into most of these our national policies and programs? And how do we promote secure land rights for women, since they are the majority within the agricultural sector, and then also the promotion of decision making at all levels in the community? So these are some of the recommendations I will make in terms of how we are able to address these social aspects that women bear as a result of climate change related issues in the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lois, for that presentation and for grounding us in those realities. It's interesting that you mentioned how the disproportionate impact of climate change on women magnifies existing gender inequities. That's a very important aspect you've introduced to the conversation. So thank you so much for your presentation. Also, thank you to Madam Stella for that presentation. Right about now, let's dive deeper with some of the follow-up questions that are coming in. And this is to you, Madam Stella. I know the process to get to the NAP didn't start today, and you've alluded to that in your presentation, but what makes the NAP different from past frameworks in terms of how inclusive it is?
Okay, thank you very much, Regina, for that question. And so if I get you right, you are asking how inclusive is the NAP framework. Right, so this thing is a journey that had started way back in 2000. And so in my earlier presentation, I mentioned that even before the start of the NAP, we're supported by IISD, International Institute of Sustainable Development, to ensure that we get a gender strategy to be able to effectively put the gender dimensions into the plan right from the word go. So I had mentioned that the NAPS made provision, even right from the policy and institutional alignment. What does this mean? Right, even at the setting up of the governance structure for the NAP, right from the steering committee to how meetings are held, has that component inculcated. One of the earlier assessments that was done was to look at even our sector policies and look at the gaps of gender exclusions and look at even our entry points. And we got a policy expert who was able to do that assessment, even just at the beginning of the start of the project. It has been inclusive from our technical working groups. Like I mentioned earlier, we had a gender specialist on the team, and then the cross-sectorial policy group. To be efficient enough to be gender responsive, we had 5 cross-sectorial policy groups. The gender ministry was a cross-cutting sector in all of the groups. So aside the different groups that represented agriculture, that represented disaster risk, that represented the private sector, that represented infrastructure, the gender ministry and the national we have reps from people living with disabilities reps on it. We have the youth rep on it. We have CSO reps that cut across. So if you look even at our membership of who is involved in decision making, has captured all of it. And like I said, if you even see a copy of our letters of how our invitations letters are sent out, it spells out how gender sensitive we are on some of these activities. And I can say for sure that in conducting even the risk assessment to informing the priority adaptation options we have right now has been gender sensitive, right from participation to getting the community involved. Like I said, adaptation is locally led. And so right from the district level, where it is the dream of the country that each district has an adaptation plan for the district to be able to plan, to be able to bring interventions on adaptation priorities, even though we are not being able to do for all, we don't have the funds for now. The little that has been started with, and with some partnerships, are engaging the district assemblies together with NDPC to ensure that this is mainstreamed. Gender education is carried on throughout the processes of the NAP lifespan as we speak right now. So the NAPS, I can say, has been very sensitive. It's building a robust data that will be sex disaggregated, that it has informed what even our priorities are in terms of the risk assessment that has been carried out. And so this is how climate responsive and gender responsive commitment the NAPS has been so far. And right now, that is a plan that is in books right now as we do. It is going to be moved up into implementation. What is the provision there? So we have a whole sustainability plan being drawn and an M&E framework that ensure that robust indicators are factored in to ensure that there's adequate gender budgeting, gender planning, gender budgeting, and then implementations when it comes to the actions on the grounds. I hope I've been able to answer your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me come to you, Lois. So Madam Stella, in her response to my question, said something about adaptation being locally led. And it brings me to wonder how women's organizations at the grassroots level can be part of this process of adaptation, of ensuring that the voices of women who are most affected by climate change are factored into decisions and policy making. What role do you think grassroots women's organizations should play in shaping this process?
Okay, thank you very much, Regina, for the question. So I will mention that one of the major roles that grassroots women organizations can do to support government agencies such as the APA and then the Agric Ministry will be for them to really be able to have, organize themselves and have very strong groups. Okay, because now the issue at the grassroots is about which groups that are organized are community led, okay, community led, and then also represent the community people. So if they're able to organize themselves, able to organize themselves and to be recognized in the community, be able to also show responsiveness to some of the community related policies that are ongoing, such as the adaptation processes that climate change is undergoing. I think these will be one of the entry points for them to be part of decision making. Many times in the communities, there are no strong women groups or, identifiable ones that the ministries are able to identify and work with. So I will mention that if they could be organized, they are registered, they are strong, they have strong leadership. This will be one of the entry points. The next is their responsiveness to some of the activities. Many times community members want to see what they would gain before benefit before they are and they see the need to be part of something. But increasing knowledge and then being able to apply it in your lives is very important. So it's not about exactly the tangible benefits that you get from programs, but the knowledge you gain and how you're able to use it to transform your agricultural related activities and also other aspects of your areas of livelihood and when areas that they find themselves in is another area that we will need to engage community-based organizations to. And then also why they should be interested in climate change. Climate change have always looked like some scientific, it has a scientific it looks scientific and it's for, if you don't have some knowledge in science or you don't see that it has any direct relationship to do with you. Some time ago, I had the opportunity to be part of International Women's Day, where I was educating the community about how climate change really affects them and how the assembly should be responsive. But they find it, they don't see the immediate impact of climate change until they have really been hard hit. So for them to really appreciate that climate change is gradual, but it has a real direct impact on whatever they find themselves doing.
The bit about the women you've engaged not seeing the immediate impact of climate change, and so this, I'm directing this question to Madam Stella. Is it because of how we are communicating the impacts of climate change? Are we bringing it down to the level of those who are very much affected by it? Because if we are sensitizing, raising awareness, but then the awareness is not hitting those it's supposed to hit, it looks like an exercise in futility. Is there a need for us to change the way we're communicating these impacts? Madam Stella.
Okay, thank you very much, Regina, for this question. Before even I attempt, I'm going to attempt this question. The impact of climate change is now felt by everybody. It's all around us. And then it has even stopped being a headline story. So right down from some years back, when we mentioned climate change, everybody is wondering, what is this? And we think that it is very far away from us. Yes, some steps have been taken to even communicate these impacts. I must appreciate the fact that perhaps it has not gone as well as it should have gone, but it's everybody's responsibility in this case. And so as climate change and its impact starts evolving, as it evolves, communication has to be out there. A lot of efforts are being made, especially from where we sit. And so in communicating, it's everybody's duty. And we, from our part, have been trying to engage whoever it is important to engage in communicating the impact of climate change and what even climate change is all about itself. Yes, we need to do more in this regard. But from our end, where we need to bring everybody on board, especially with regard to how this plan, National Adaptation Plan, has been prepared, all the levels that needs to developed have been developed, and we are still in the process of doing it. And so you see the NAP is taken on at the sectorial, at the national and at the sub-national levels. We have had collaborations with partners. SIGRA is one of our partners who has been very, very innovative with us to even making funds as to how we can bring this communication to the doorstep. We have had to utilize the opportunities of UNCDF, IISD, where a lot of activities are being carried out. And so now the district assembly is also a part of this process. And then they are getting their people involved as well. We take the information, we take the knowledge to them, and then it is expected that this information is communicated. I must give you one of these SIGRA's example in the Volta region, where they have engaged community level youth-led women groups. And they were empowered to the extent that in our last review sessions, they were able to walk to district assemblies to go and ask them about their programs, and then they wanted to be a part of the process. I think it's the beginning of a conversation. We have had a number of these youth groups, including yourself, your team, where you have been communicating and being empowered to know that, look, you have a right. But like I said, this job is big and it's everybody's business. And so let us all get involved, let us communicate more so that we can bring it to the doorstep of everybody. But in the meantime, at the processes where it needs to be attended to, I think it has been done. But then I can appreciate the fact that a lot more has to be done. And perhaps we change how we communicate. When we make it everybody's business and we are all sharing information, I think it will get to a point where everybody now understands and everybody has the knowledge to take decisions where it has to be taken. Thank you.
The bit about everybody's business and everybody needing to be part of it. I was going to ask a question about how, because on this in this meeting today, we have participants from NGOs, academia, and local communities, how they can plug into the NAP process and make sure their voices, especially women's voices, youth voices, voices of persons with disabilities are heard. That's to you. A follow-up question to you, Madam Stella. What practical ways can they plug into the process?
Okay. So it's a very good question from this one, how we can all be a part of it. So in my earlier submissions and the structures that we have, we have quite a number of CSOs. So we have reached out to the national umbrellas where NGOs and CSOs have been a part of this group, including the private sector. And so what this NAP intends to do with this communication is that we want to build on existing structures without duplications. And so the NAP has even made provision where if it becomes formal, even when interventions are going on and we know where we can start it from, we can build on what has already been started on. And we can even pick from the plans for our interventions. Because in every district, if we are able to get to where we have to get to, where it is our dream that every district has a climate action plan, let's call it a NAP for this district, there are a lot of priorities that have been identified. Funding becomes a challenge right now. And so why would we need to duplicate efforts when there are other priority areas? So in our conversation where everybody has to be engaged, where communication has to go, I think we have to all communicate once through a channel that this is where we want to go to. So if I am an NGO or a CSO who wants to bring up a project in a community, how do I even start? Your starting point is even with the assembly. And if out of the priority areas, you are able to pick on one and start working on that so that we ensure that we don't even duplicate efforts. If we are able to get down to our local planning authorities, I think that the starting point could also be there. And then conversations from you to asking and even demanding accountability is also crucial in the process here. So I think communication to the private sector, yes, We cannot engage everybody. We have not engaged everybody, but the essential groups, as at this stage in the planning stage, have been done. And then one of the things with the engagement is that we strategically ask for representations not to be present at decision making, but to disseminate information. So, assuming you are a part of the processes and we are done, one of your expectations as spelled out from the initial conversations is how do you also help in disseminating the information in your quarters that you lead. And I think if we all utilize those structures that are available, it will go a long way to help the information. But you cannot appreciate the challenges there. So people keep a lot of information to themselves. You can go to the same group you have engaged, and then you start having a conversation, and it's as if you have a new group you have to engage all over again. And so these are some of the challenges, and we hope to jump the gutter when the time comes up. But there are challenges with it, but we have started, and we expect that everybody who is involved, has been involved, or who will be involved would help in this information sharing. Thank you.
Very well. As you're talking about challenges, I just remembered you, Madam Stella, mention sex disaggregated data in your presentation. And this question is directed to you, Madam Lois. Sex disaggregated data seems to be an issue for a lot of policy planners and implementers. For such an important venture like inclusive adaptation, how do we go about ensuring commitment to sex disaggregated data in this process?
Okay, thank you very much, Regina. So I would say that one way to have that kind of commitment is to be intentional about it, and that will mean training both civil society organizations, state institutions, and community-based, everybody within the value chain need to appreciate why it is important to disaggregate data for us to know how many men, how many women we are engaging at each level, such that we're able to strike the proportions. Many times we present gender data only mentioning the number of women, but we don't strike it against the number of men. So we are not able to know whether, if we even said we train 1,000 women, what is the data in general in terms of men and women, for you to even know whether it was just 10% or just 5% of the population that have been targeted. And so I would say that it is important for training on gender disaggregated data to be made consciously as part of our indicators, and then some of the priorities that we have to make in order to be able to measure the work that we are doing. I would say it's a priority.
Very well. So at this point, we'll open the floor so our participants can ask questions. I see a number of people already who raised their hands, so I will come to you. Elham Mumuni, yes, you can speak. Your question, comment, or reflection.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Alham and I work with the SIGRA project as the Gender ICSO's advisor. It's a reflection and a contribution. And listening to both Stella and Lois, I am happy that, for Ghana, we've already achieved a lot, and then there's still a lot to be done. And then speaking from the perspective of SIGRA projects, which is a 5-year Government of Canada funded project to support gender responsive climate adaptation. So for us, looking at advancing gender equality, inclusivity in the NAP process, we are also looking at directly engaging women-led organizations, both at the national districts and then at the community level. So to support this, we have developed community driven advocacy and awareness campaign strategies, where we've been able to identify some of the lived experiences of women at the grassroots level in terms of the negative impact on climate change in their daily lives, and then how we can support with adaptation measures to support them to be able to also adapt throughout the process. So just to say that I'm happy that this conversation we are having it now, and then also looking at Stella's presentation. She spoke so well to the issues on the ground, the reality of most women and girls on the ground, and then Lois as well. They both spoke to what we as SIGRA also have been engaged with, and then some of the studies that we have done also aligns with most of the presentation. So again, to support with mainstreaming, we're also looking at we've been engaging with NDPC to support mainstreaming gender particularly, and then climate adaptation in the current MTDPs that are being developed. So we've supported NDPC to revise a gender toolkit together with GIZ to revise the toolkit that would support them to be able to mainstream. Because if you want climate-related or gender-related activities to have impact, it has to start at the district level. And at the district level, it has to start from consultation, planning, budgeting, and reporting. So again, as a project, we are interested in all of these processes. That is why we are also looking at which entry areas will give us the needed results that we all want. So hence starting with NDPC, and then at the district level, also ensuring that these toolkits are being used to mainstream gender, to mainstream climate change, and then also to budget for them and also to report on them. So those are the few reflections I also wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next, Efia is our next participant. We can hear you now, Efia.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, the UN Security Council 1325 on Women, Peace, and Security addresses a lot of these issues as well. We're just ending our second NAP for that. And I'm wondering what the panelists think, and thank you for your presentations. They were very enlightening. What you think about how 1325 might be used to help with the climate issues as they affect women.
Thank you. Madam Lois, you can start answering that question.
Thank you very much. So I would say that if you could notice how my presentation went, there are many issues that come up as part of climate change. The main policy issues do not address, and one of it is the peace and security aspect. And I think that it hadn't been really well integrated into climate change. Peace and security, the UN peace and security framework, seems to stand in terms of issues on conflict-related issues, but not been so much integrated into climate change. And I think this is an eye-opening side that, and as much as we come up with programs and then actions in the community level, we should be able to have, and we should also have that in mind, that issues on peace and security is very critical when we get to climate change. I don't know whether our other consultants, they have done anything on peace and security, but I think it's been more focused on adaptation and then the other programs in ensuring that women are able to take actions to address the effect. But I can't speak too much about the peace and security since I'm yet to know how well it has been integrated.
Okay, let me come to you, Madam Stella. Still that question about the nexus between the UNSCR 1325 and then the adaptation plan for climate change.
Okay, thank you very much. So it has to talk about security issues. And so, yes, these are legal and policy gaps. And so Ghana's climate strategy so far exists largely in the form of policies, right? And not law. It's just recently that Act 490 was reviewed, now 1124, that has made climate change as Chapter 5 of our law. That is to take care of all emerging issues on climate change. And then we are yet to move on to the legislations that will guide the implementation of our law. But there is no standalone climate security, I stand to be corrected, legal framework. And so it limits the enforcement and integration across here. But I think that this is an area that our legislation may look at to be able to handle that aspect of the impacts of climate change with respect to climate change. And so the National Adaptation Plan, like I said, it also aligns with our SDGs. And so it provides essential guidance where it is needed, because we do that most with collaboration. So we have engaged security enforcement agencies, institutions, and all of that. But like I said, now that our Act 1124 has brought the Chapter 5, legislations are likely to look at it, but it's not a standalone as of now.
Very well. Thank you for your responses. We're still taking more questions. You can send them in the chat or just gesture with the raised hand, and then would allow you to ask the questions. While we are on that, let me just inform all of you that we have put in the chat the link for the post-webinar survey. So as we're going through this process and wrapping up, kindly take some few minutes to respond to the questions in there. We'll be very grateful. So let me read a couple of questions or comments that have come in the chat. This one is from Hudu Abdallah, says, oftentimes we focus so much on policy level inclusion rather than implementation level. How do we transcend our advocacy work from policy level to implementation level where the real impact can be made? I'll start with you, Madam Stella.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm taking a question on policy level inclusion without getting it down to the grassroots. I beg to differ a bit on this, because the frameworks that respond to these gender issues particularly make sure that it gets to the rooting where it has to get. And so an example is a plan. So it's the National Adaptation Plan in focus today. And so it is a planning process. So we have now drawn a plan. And then as part of the plan is to look at how it is being mainstreamed. It's not to even look at, it's supposed to be mainstreamed into our policies. And so working together with NDPC, that will come to light where gender perspectives have been factored. Now at the start, this will be reduced down to the subnational levels. So if you engage with the district assemblies, you will know that a lot is being changing around, because now they are even reporting formats supposed to engage. So now they are not just taking activities just out of the blue. It is a planned program. We had a recent peer learning training for some of the district assemblies. We couldn't do all. And one of the interventions, when you look at the roadmap that they have, most of these priority areas, especially the districts that have some risk assessments and priorities have been given to them, are prioritizing it in their medium-term development plans. And so when it gets to that stage, then the implementation. But like I speak, it is now a plan that will even be outdoored, then it will lead to the implementation stage. And the good news is that if it is mainstream, then that means funding will be made available to be able to ensure that these activities get to the grassroots, because our planning processes have been decentralized right to the district level, and that is where development starts. Thank you.
Madam Lois, you do a lot of advocacy in your line of work. You want to take or attempt this question about how advocacy can transcend from policy level to implementation level so that real impact can be made.
Okay, thank you very much, Regina, for the question. So I will say that, everything is one step at a time. I think since I started work with the civil society organization, I knew climate change has always been a major issue, and we have always been part of it. But as the issue, every year we seem to see that climate change seems to be getting. Everyone seems to be getting affected by climate change in different ways, and we all can even attest to it. Initially, it looked very far, but now it's so close. I would say that the more the issue become topical, the more we identify the inequalities and then the effects that it have on all of us. And then be able to come up with a plan. And without a plan, it will be difficult to track progress. So I would say it's one step at a time. A number of things have been done in terms of implementation, but it's because we hadn't put indicators and then systems to collate them. So sometimes it's difficult to be able to mention that it's always been policy. No, I will not agree that it's always been about policy. There have been policy discussions, and I know a number of activities that have been taken, just that it hadn't been directly linked to climate change. The government have even undertaken a number of activities like the one district, one village, one village, one dam. All these were climate change related strategies, but they weren't tagged as climate change. So we won't mention it as climate change, but a number is already ongoing. Trainings that empower women on some of these things, they indirectly address some of the climate change inequalities, but we have to mainstream them and then be able to identify them into one box. I would say is how we report them and then the branches that which we report under them, that has made it look like implementation doesn't have any relationship to do with policy. But I would say a lot have gone on over the years.
Okay, and just stay here, Madam Lois, because the next question has to do with something you mentioned in your presentation, property rights. So this one is from Bule Munihaha. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. It says, considering property rights for women, young girls, and youth, are there systems in place to ensure they can access their rightful inheritance after the demise of their parents? Often, extended family members seize their properties, creating added burdens. What measures can be taken to protect their rights, especially since secure property ownership is vital for building resilience and adapting to the impact of climate change?
Okay, thank you very much. I would say that if we are looking at the issue of property right, particularly Ghana, we have a number of different laws within the family, at the family level, that protects the rights of almost everyone. The problem is the knowledge, okay? The knowledge. How do we get the direct beneficiaries of these laws to know about them and then take advantage? So I would say the Constitution of Ghana even makes it that once you are married, you have spousal rights, okay, both at divorce and then when at the demise of your partner, okay, and you are supposed to be given a reasonable portion of whatever property you acquire together. The same too with children. The intestate succession law gives priority to children. The Wills Act makes, I would say that the enforcement of these laws, the knowledge of it, and for people to take steps to be able to ensure that they're able to access some of these opportunities that are in our inheritance laws is the challenge. But if it is about laws, even recently, the Land Act made provision to ensure that spouses are able to benefit from landed properties they acquire. Is the knowledge and then the means to access justice. That's where the challenge is. And I will encourage that programs, climate change related programs could look at these dimensions, property rights, access to justice, so that, communities that are worst hit by climate change, women and children are able to take steps to access their property rights.
Thank you. Madam Stella, as you attempt this question, also the part that Madam Lois has talked about how climate change frameworks and programs should include property rights, land rights. Talk to us about how this NAP addresses those issues in answering this question.
That's a very interesting one you're asking me to attempt. property rights. And so would appreciate also that gender issues are not homogeneous, right? And so most of our interventions, let me come from this angle. Sometimes when you even go with interventions, depending on where you go, there are times that you cannot even sit with women alone because we have some cultural practices as a country. And so some of these rights that you're talking about with our climate interventions, where we go there to, it is dependent on what the culture is and the interventions you bring. We appreciate that land rights are issues. How do we deal with them? Most of them, the way you go about them, you realize that the fight with them, some of these practices that have not been okay, we think are not okay as are now, have been difficult to fight them. So sometimes you have to go and then learn how these things work around in those areas. There are times that they won't even allow the woman to even access to a land. But if it's a group thing, when interventions and a group, a whole community will benefit from, that is where it works well and everything. But I think this is a national issue that has to be dealt with on that perspective, where women can get access to the properties that have been given them and how they can have land ownerships. As I speak with you, I can say that there are some arrangements that could make that happen, though not legally, not backed by law, but there are cultural practices that have been very rigid in some time past. But now discussions have made it easy for women to access some of these things, to be able to utilize them for their livelihoods. And so that is a tackle, because that is also the cultural practices is also another barrier that we have to deal with. So from the soft way of approach to how to get people to understand why it is important that women equally can benefit from these resources and how it even benefits their family and the community, I think that the approach is a bit different from ensuring that, no, you have the right or you don't have the right. So for now, we are approaching it the way it has to be approached, when culture is also brought into the discussion. And if there's a way around it where people can benefit from these properties to be able to battle the effects of climate change or find livelihoods for themselves. And I can tell you, in some cases, it works perfectly. Thank you.
Very well. We're still taking more questions. I'd read the next one from Song Foundation. Before that, though, just let me remind you, we've put the link for the post-webinar survey in the chat. Kindly take a few minutes to respond to those questions in there. It's for the planning for future webinars. Thank you so much. So this is from Song Foundation. It says, climate change often increases unpaid care work for women and limits opportunities for youth and PWDs. What practical steps can government and NGOs take to reduce these burdens while building resilience? Any one of you can take this question, can start answering this question.
Okay, so Regina, thank you very much. I think before I even answer this question, just to add on to the one Stella, what she recently answered, how do we promote property rights within the NDCs? So I would say that there have been a number of community-based models where communities have been trained on their property rights. That's increasing knowledge on them, such as the legal awareness, World of Legal Awareness Program. Since SIGRA is here, I mean, these are things they may consider as part of some of their community activities at the district level. So the legal awareness program, where we build the capacity of women as legal literacy volunteers. They are based in their communities. They have knowledge on the family laws and gender. And so they understand the provisions in the interstate succession law, the Wills Act, the marriage laws, the Domestic Violence Act. So when there's any issue in the community, they're able to use their legal knowledge in advising on how they could be able to use that to review sociocultural norms in the community, and also to encourage their colleague women and community members to be able to access justice. They said the various state institutions like legal aid, the Shiraj officers, to be able to access their property rights. So these models can be, can be some of the models that SIGRA can champion, SIGRA and then the EPA can look at and champion in promoting property rights within the NDCs. In continuing with this on the unpaid care work bit, I want to say that one of the ways that civil society organizations have used in addressing the unpaid care work had been the resources, community-based facilities that women patronize should be situated at vantage points such that maybe if they have to take 30 minutes to walk to the borehole, it's closer to their home so that now it will take 5 minutes. The grinding mill, some of these community-based inputs, machineries and input that women patronize in undertaking their activities in the home and at the community level, they should be situated not too far away but closer. Also, the issue on the time diary, how much time they spend on each activity and how they could be able to how they are supported by their partners at home using the gender family model approaches that World have used in helping their family members, particularly their husbands and the male children, to support them at home to reduce the burden of care work. The argument now is about finding some kind of which there hasn't been any policy direction. It's an advocacy issue where if there should be some some allowances to be paid to women, particularly who spend so much time at home. That decision haven't been taken in Ghana yet, but that's something that civil society is championing. So I would say that these have been ways that civil society have been engaging communities and then how they could be able to reduce the burden of care work on women and then on girls. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This next question is from Patience Ga. It's a long one, but I want to take it as it is. It says, thank you to both presenters for the insightful presentations. I've heard about the NAP project, but this is my first time joining a discussion on the adaptation plan. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Dietetics at the University for Development Studies with research interests in maternal and child health. I'm currently leading a study on designing and implementing climate-smart nutrition interventions to improve dietary diversity among pregnant women in Northern Ghana. Following your presentations, I'd like to know how academics and academic institutions, academic institutions how well researchers and academic institutions are being engaged in the NAP process, particularly given the importance of generating local context-specific data to inform climate adaptation measures. This question is directed to you, Madam Stella. How well is EPA, the other institutions, how well are they integrating and incorporating researchers and academics in the NAP process?
Okay, thank you very much. So how well are academics being engaged? They are engaged, but like I said, it's groups and umbrellas that are representatives that are being engaged as of now. NAP has been spoken about largely. How are we inculcating research from academic institutions? And so I would like to mention again here is that it's a planning process. And I like the area that is coming on because I also like to mention that there's even a health NAP, a NAP that has been developed by the health sector on the impacts of climate change on health. So it's also a good way to go. And so in the plan, one of the principles of the NAP is using indigenous knowledge plus the science. And this work is being done by 4 site planners who are locals. And then we have some reps even with the University of Ghana when they had to bid for that contract to do that work. And they are not even working for just the NAP project alone. They are doing other risk assessments for other partner partner agencies for development of the NAP for some districts. And I can say that if you look at the processes of engagement and how they are all local-based information that has been collected from the community, with the community, and even to the adaptation priorities to even the options. Now at the stage of costing what these priorities will cost us if we have to take these interventions. So they are locally generated, and then it is by research based with indigenous knowledge. So this is not out of place how it's being done. It's studies that has been carried on locally that has been done. Like I said, the plan is yet to even come out. So we are not even done with the plan itself. When the plan comes and then mainstreaming comes, like a step-by-step approach, then we look at the implementation of it. And the sectors that have involved with the area he's coming from, I can say that the Ministry of Health and the Ghana Health Service have even gone on this way to develop a health now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we actually will be wrapping up in a bit. I'll just take one more comment and one more question if there is from participants, and then we take the final statements from our guest speakers. This is a follow-up comment from Efia. It says, there are also issues regarding girl-child education when water, firewood, etc. are farther away because of climate change. Then the girl is enlisted to assist, and she either can't go to school or gets there late and misses some of her classwork. It is very sad that the girls are still considered second class. It's a comment from Ifya. There is one more question from Mildred Amu Enim Dafo, and that'll be our final question. Our final question for the Q&A session says, in our engagements with the community folks whose livelihoods are directly affected by climate change, is it necessary to have tailored solutions for them? Can we consider climate resilient seeds and drought-resistant crops for our women farmers? There's a question she's asking. Can we get them weather forecasting tools and educate them on insurance and microcredit to help in sustaining their sources of livelihood amid the climate change crisis? This is a number of questions being asked by Mildred. I'd go to you, Madam Lois, to answer this question.
So, thank you. The inequalities seems to, affect everyone, and the girl child is one of it. Okay, yeah. And I know that in Kenya, for instance, they have integrated climate change into their curriculum, such that right from, at the school level, they're able to appreciate how to adapt to some of the effects of climate change in their environments. And so I would say that it's true that climate change affects children, particularly in the areas of flooding where they are not able to attend school. It's not only the girl child, both the boy and the girl child, but anyway, this is gender. So gender, the girl child becomes a priority. But I would say that one of it is about being able to engage them, appreciate, have climate change related school clubs where they're able to appreciate some of how to adapt to climate change related effects. So I would say, yeah, it is real, but for us, as to whether we have been able to take steps in having these engagement with the young girls, I don't think there has been much done about it. But EPA and then SIGRA is here. These are areas that we could do. And one of the countries that have prioritized is Kenya, where it's integrated into their curriculum.
Madam Stella, the question about integrating into curriculum, where does the EPA stand in that?
So it will excite you to know that at a basic level, it has been inculcated into our curriculum in Ghana. And this has been on for the past 3 or 4 years. So we have it in our curriculum at the basic level. The upscaling is now what is left to be done. And right at the university stage right now, a lot of collaborations with us to develop it to most of their curriculum and how you can factor in the gender dimensions. But I can say for a fact that at our basic school levels, this have been factored, the climate change.
One more question. Just it's not even a question, it's a comment. It's coming in from Kodima Sita. It says, I'm Dr. Kodima Sita, Executive Director for Center for Opportunities and Rural Development. When aligning gender issues to climate change, it's a very important issue. Sorry, it's a very important issue to really catered for. The most vulnerable people are those in rural communities who get raped and robbed just because they have to walk about 45 minutes to fetch water due to drought. They get abused domestically because they return late and cook. And it says they get sexually abused after being stressed, after being burdened with unpaid care work. The other challenge is our cultural norms that promote gender inequality and prevents women from owning lands and even getting access to productive lands. My other worry is that few women donor organizations with limited resources in promoting inclusivity, and also how women-led organizations utilize funds geared towards women empowerment. There should be a deliberate effort and policies targeting women empowerment, not okay. So basically what he's saying is that and we've talked about a number of the issues here, how climate change is magnifying inequities, domestic violence, sexual and gender-based violence, but also deliberate efforts from women organizations in this process. The final one, how can NAP processes and adaptation financing be designed to promote financial inclusion for women, youth, and PWDs? I'm taking this question because it's introducing an important aspect to this conversation, financing. Madam Stella, you could answer this question and then we wrap up the conversation.
Okay, so the question is on financial inclusion. How can it be financed?
How can adaptation processes be financed to promote financial inclusion for women, youth, and PWDs so that they can lead and benefit from climate smart?
Okay, so how can adaptation interventions be financed to benefit people with PWDs, right? And so, like I said, from the planning stage, it has all been encapsulated. It's gender responsive. And then the costing, this is not just a plan, but this plan goes ahead to cost the priorities, the adaptation options that have been chosen. What is the costing going to do? The costing is going to tell you that if we have to undertake this initiative, this priority option, this is the cost that likely is going to go. To give even Ghana a heads up what it will take us to plan for the adaptation priorities that we have. So I think that the financial aspect is being built in. The other side of it is that we are looking at investment strategies that are being prepared, or how we can solicit for some financing. And so it will also interest you to know that the NAP, during its closure, as one of its activities, was looking at putting up some concept notes to be able to continue to work after the plan has been drafted. And so some concept notes have been developed for some districts. The strategy is being developed, how we could use this strategy, which is not even yet on the table as we speak, almost done, to make sure that we find some finance strategies of how we can get adaptation involved. The issue of the PWD, once it's been captured into the plan that will lead to the implementation, once we get the finances, looking at the financial strategies that will be built for us, the financial mechanisms, then that is where we'll source for some funding. I want to emphasize also here that the NAP is an iterative activity. And so it moves on after a cycle, it has a whole cycle where there will be some review when it's moving on to its next cycle. And then when things are messed up, then there's an opportunity to recapture them. And so it is coming with a sustainability plan, which is yet to be financed as well. So it's made provision for sustainability of the NAP and even an M&E, how to match up with what the policies and the draft plan is saying against what has been done. So I think that the NAP is comprehensive itself enough. When it is done, that step is done, and then we are moving to the implementation. Then the nitties and the gritties will come into play. I like to touch on a question that mentioned agric interventions, whether they are impactful. There are a lot of interventions in the system, especially within the areas of agriculture when smart agricultural practices with resilient and drought crops are provided for people of marginalized groups. There are a lot of these examples. I think communicating them has been a challenge, but there's a lot on the ground that has been done to get to a step where we can communicate these interventions and these implementations to make it seem more real than it's being spoken of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just one final comment, and I'll take your closing remarks. This is from Judith from Kenya. Says, my suggestion will also be that the media in Ghana ought to also set the agenda on some of these issues on climate change in order to make it a topic for discussion for everybody. That is a very important perspective. And we will try and in our next webinar, also have journalists in this conversation. But our guest speakers, I'll take closing remarks from each of you, a minute each, and then we can wrap up the conversation. Before they do that, though, let me just remind participants in the meeting, please, we have put in the chat the link for the post-webinar survey. Kindly take a few minutes to just fill out the form. We'll be very grateful. So let's take our closing remarks. I'll start with you, Madam Lois.
Okay, so these are my closing remarks. The issue on gender climate change seems to get broadened, but as we try to ensure that they are effectively implemented. So many areas seems to play out, but I would say that these areas have not been left without attention being given. All I would say is that with EPA and then donor organizations being around, the models that have worked in certain communities in addressing some of the issues such as property rights and girl child education, we could look at some of these best practices and models that have been used, integrate them into climate change interventions, and then having a holistic approach, a very holistic approach. And then also you could bring on board various actors who are not directly implementing climate change but most of their interventions indirectly address climate change. These are things I would recommend, and my colleague has said there should be more awareness on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you too. Madam Stella, your closing remarks.
Okay, so I say that we are all involved in this fight. The dry spells are prolonging, the rains are failing, the floods are rising all the time. And these are just not frontline stories. They are not side stories. These are just realities of the impacts of climate change. And so for us in a situation where adaptation and building resilience is our option, I think that we should reshape the systems. Let's all be a part of this process in our communication, in our word-to-word conversations that we have. Let's enlighten who has to be enlightened. Let's get everybody involved so that the clearer evidence we see where women and the marginalized groups are the ones who are burdened with the impacts of climate change, we come out with interventions that will lessen these burdens on them. I thank you very much for this opportunity. Lois, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you
thank you all for
too.
joining us.
Yeah, thank you too, Stella, for this conversation.
Okay, so thank you all for joining us today for this important conversation. We've had very powerful insights on the gendered impacts of climate change and the gender priorities in Ghana's NAP. What is very clear and we're taking home is that climate change is not gender neutral, and so adaptation, if it has to be effective, must be inclusive. On behalf of GenCED and our partners, we want to thank you, our distinguished speakers, Madam Stella, Madam Lois, for sharing your expertise and perspectives. Also to each and every one of our participants for engaging, asking questions, contributing to this conversation. Thank you so much. This is just the beginning of our series of conversations we'll be hosting to amplify gender responsive climate action in Ghana. And we look forward to having you join us in the next webinars. Before you leave, please remember to complete the post-webinar survey. Your feedback is very important to us. It will help us in improving and shaping the upcoming sessions. We've shared the link in the chat, so kindly complete that survey before you leave. Together, let's continue to push for climate action that protects not just the environment, but also the rights, voices, and resilience of women, youth, and all vulnerable groups. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. I'm Regina Bolibote. Have a wonderful day.